What's up, everyone? Tonight, you're traveling back to ancient Greece where the most interesting stuff happened behind closed doors, in underground chambers, and definitely away from your average tourist with a chiton and sandals. You probably wouldn't survive most of these rituals. They involved everything from mysterious vapors to wine-fueled madness to secrets so sacred that breaking them meant death. So before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Tonight, we're exploring the hidden world of Greek mystery religions, those secretive cults and ceremonies that promised everything from eternal life to divine knowledge. Comment below with your city and current time. I love seeing where in the world you're listening to these ancient secrets unfold. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background sound, and let's begin our journey tonight. You stand at the gates of Eleusis, 14 miles northwest of Athens, in the cool pre-dawn darkness of September. The air carries the scent of barley fields and burning olive oil from the torches that flicker along the sacred way. Your bare feet feel the worn marble stones beneath them, polished smooth by thousands of pilgrims who have walked this path before you. The Eleusinian Mysteries are about to begin, and you're about to become part of the most exclusive religious club in the ancient world. The person beside you shivers, not from cold, but from anticipation. You've both spent months preparing for this moment, fasting, purifying yourselves in the sea of Phaleron, sacrificing a piglet to Demeter. The preliminary rites in Athens were just the warm-up act. What happens here, in this sacred precinct dedicated to the goddess of grain and the harvest, will supposedly transform your understanding of life and death forever. No pressure or anything. You notice how the other initiates move with a mixture of excitement and genuine terror. These aren't just random Greeks looking for a spiritual experience. Many are prominent politicians, philosophers, and even foreign dignitaries. Cicero himself will one day call the Eleusinian Mysteries the most sacred and awesome of all rites. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius will make the journey here. But tonight, in 450 BCE, you're surrounded by Athenians who understand that what you're about to witness must never, ever be spoken about to anyone who hasn't been through this exact experience. The Hierophant emerges from the shadows, the high priest whose voice will guide you through the sacred drama about to unfold. His face is painted with sacred symbols, and he wears robes so ancient they seem to shimmer with their own inner light. The fact that the role of Hierophant was hereditary, passed down through the same family for over 1,000 years, gives you some idea of how seriously the Greeks took these proceedings. This is in your neighborhood, priest reading from a standard prayer book. As you enter the great hall called the Telesterion, the largest covered space in the ancient world designed specifically for religious ceremonies, you realize the Greeks were early pioneers in atmospheric lighting design. Torches create dancing shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the darkness, you can hear the faint sound of water trickling. The building can hold thousands of people, but tonight it feels intimate, almost conspiratorial. You're sitting on stone steps that rise like an amphitheater around a central sacred area that remains shrouded in mystery. The ceremony begins with a reenactment of Demeter's search for her daughter Persephone, who was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. But this isn't a simple storytelling session. It's a full sensory experience involving sacred objects that are never described in any surviving text, ritual foods that induce altered states of consciousness, and revelations that apparently gave initiates a completely different understanding of what happens after death. Historians still debate whether the initiates consumed a barley drink called kykeon that contained ergot, a natural psychedelic compound. You watch as sacred objects are revealed in carefully choreographed moments. The exact nature of these objects, called the hieria, has been successfully kept secret for over 2,000 years, making the Eleusinian Mysteries perhaps the most successful classified information operation in human history. We know that Aeschylus, the great tragedian, was actually prosecuted for allegedly revealing mysteries in one of his plays, though he was acquitted when he proved he'd never been initiated. The darkness around you seems to pulse with whispered prayers and the rustle of sacred garments. You feel a profound sense of connection to something larger than yourself, which was exactly the point. The mystery religions offered something that traditional Greek religion, with its quarreling, petty gods and emphasis on ritual correctness, couldn't provide: a personal relationship with the divine and a promise that death wasn't the end of the story. As the night progresses, you experience what ancient sources describe as a dramatic shift from darkness to light, from terror to ecstasy, from death to rebirth. The climax of the ritual apparently involved the Hierophant displaying a single ear of grain in brilliant light, a simple symbol that somehow conveyed profound truths about the cycle of life, death, and renewal. It sounds almost anticlimactic until you realize you've been prepared for hours to receive this moment as a divine revelation. When dawn finally breaks over the sanctuary, you emerge as a mist, an initiate who has seen the sacred things. You're now part of an exclusive community that spans social classes, city-states, and even centuries. The promise you've received isn't just about personal salvation. It's about understanding your place in the cosmic order. The ancient world didn't have much in the way of comforting afterlife beliefs, so the assurance that death is not evil was genuinely revolutionary. You find yourself walking through the marble corridors of Aphrodite's temple in Corinth, where the morning sun filters through perfumed air thick with frankincense and something else entirely: the unmistakable tension of sacred sexuality. The polished floors beneath your sandals reflect frescoes depicting scenes that would make your average museum curator reach for the mature audience's only placard. Welcome to one of ancient Greece's most controversial religious practices, where the line between worship and pleasure was not just blurred, it was completely redrawn in scented oils. The temple hierodoles, sacred prostitutes, though that translation doesn't quite capture the complexity of their role, move through the sacred spaces with a dignity that suggests they're performing religious duties, not simply providing services. These aren't desperate women forced into degrading circumstances. They're educated, often well-compensated religious functionaries whose work was considered essential to maintaining cosmic harmony. Strabo, the ancient geographer, claimed this temple employed over 1,000 such women, though historians still debate whether he was reporting facts or indulging in the ancient equivalent of tabloid sensationalism. You watch as a wealthy merchant from Athens approaches one of the hierodoles, not with the furtive manner of someone seeking illicit pleasure, but with the reverence of someone about to participate in a sacred ritual. The transaction that follows involves prayers, offerings to the goddess, and carefully prescribed ceremonies that transform what might otherwise be a simple commercial exchange into an act of worship. The Greeks believed that sexual pleasure, when properly channeled through religious ritual, could bring humans closer to the divine realm where the gods themselves engaged in passionate affairs. The scent of roses and myrrh hangs heavy in the air as you observe the morning purification rituals. The hierodoles bathe in water blessed by the priests of Aphrodite, anoint themselves with sacred oils, and receive individual blessings that consecrate their bodies as living temples of the goddess. It's a far cry from the shame-based attitudes towards sexuality that would later dominate Western religion. Here, physical pleasure is viewed as a direct manifestation of divine energy, a sacred force that deserves reverence rather than condemnation. The architecture itself reflects this integration of sensuality and spirituality. Every curve of the marble columns, every relief carved into the temple walls, celebrates the human form and its capacity for both beauty and pleasure. You notice how the morning light plays across these surfaces, creating shadows that seem to dance with erotic energy. The Greeks were apparently the original masters of mood lighting, understanding that environment shapes experience in profound ways. A priestess approaches you, her chiton draped in the deep red that symbolizes Aphrodite's passion. She explains that what outsiders often misunderstand about temple prostitution is its fundamentally religious nature. These acts aren't performed for personal gratification, but as offerings to the goddess, with participants understanding themselves as channels for divine love. The money exchanged isn't payment for services, but rather temple donations that support the ongoing religious work of the sanctuary. You learn that not all Greek cities embrace this practice. Athens, for instance, was notably more conservative in its approach to sacred sexuality. The Corinthians, however, viewed their temple prostitution as a competitive advantage, attracting wealthy visitors from across the Mediterranean who came seeking both spiritual enlightenment and physical pleasure. It was essentially ancient religious tourism, complete with the questionable decision-making that modern Vegas would recognize. The morning rituals reach their climax as the sun reaches its zenith directly overhead. Sacred dancers move through the temple courtyards, their movements deliberately erotic but also undeniably spiritual. The rhythm of drums and flutes creates a hypnotic atmosphere that seems to dissolve the boundaries between sacred and secular, between worship and desire. You find yourself understanding how the Greeks could view sexual ecstasy as a genuine form of religious experience, a momentary transcendence of ordinary consciousness. As afternoon approaches, you observe the careful protocols that govern every aspect of temple life. The hieroglyphs aren't available to just anyone who shows up with coins. Potential participants must demonstrate understanding of the religious significance of their actions and show proper respect for the goddess. There are purification requirements, ritual preparations, and sacred formulas that must be observed. Even divine pleasure, apparently, requires good paperwork. The economic impact of this religious practice was substantial. The Temple of Aphrodite was one of Corinth's most important sources of revenue, attracting visitors who spent money not just on religious services, but on lodging, food, and luxury goods throughout the city. Some scholars argue that the prosperity of ancient Corinth was built largely on sacred prostitution, making it perhaps the first example of a religious economy based on organized sacred sexuality. You notice how the late afternoon light transforms the temple's atmosphere, casting everything in golden hues that seem to bless even the most intimate encounters taking place within the sanctuary. The hieroglyphs continue their work with the same dedication you might expect from any other religious professional, understanding their role as essential to maintaining the cosmic balance between human desire and divine approval. As evening approaches and you prepare to leave this fascinating temple complex, you reflect on how different ancient attitudes towards sexuality were from modern assumptions. The Greeks saw nothing contradictory about combining religious devotion with physical pleasure, viewing the human body and its desires as sacred rather than shameful. It's a perspective that challenges contemporary thinking about the relationship between spirituality and sexuality, suggesting that what we often view as incompatible, the ancients saw as naturally complementary. You stumble through the torchlit streets of ancient Athens on a warm March evening, following the wild procession of Dionysius worshippers as they wind their way toward the sacred grove outside the city walls. The air thrums with the deep bass notes of drums and the haunting melody of flutes, while the scent of fermented wine mingles with burning pine resin and something earthier, the unmistakable aroma of human bodies moving in ecstatic abandon. Tonight, you're about to witness why the Romans would eventually ban these festivals as too dangerous for civilized society, though civilized is probably not the word you'd use for what's about to unfold. The Dionysiac Mysteries transform ordinary Greeks into something primal and divine, blurring the careful boundaries that usually separate humans from gods, sanity from madness, and inhibition from complete liberation. You watch as respectable Athenian matrons tear their carefully arranged chitons and let their hair flow wild, while dignified merchants abandon their measured commercial demeanor for something that looks suspiciously like holy insanity. The god of wine and ecstasy doesn't discriminate based on social class. Everyone gets equally unhinged. Your guide tonight is a priestess whose eyes gleam with the particular intensity of someone who has stared directly into the divine and lived to tell about it. Though tell might be too strong a word since the mysteries demand silence from their initiates. She leads you deeper into the grove where ancient olive trees create natural chambers illuminated by flickering torches. The shadows dance across bark scarred by decades of ritual use, and you realize these trees have witnessed transformations that would make modern psychology textbooks seem conservative. The wine being passed around isn't your ordinary symposium refreshment. It's been blessed, concentrated, and possibly enhanced with herbs that induce altered states of consciousness. Historians still debate whether the Greeks deliberately added psychoactive substances to their ritual wine, but watching the effects on the participants around you, it's clear that something more than simple fermentation is at work. The laughter becomes more musical, the dancing more fluid, and the boundary between self and cosmos grows increasingly negotiable. You observe the careful choreography of controlled chaos as the ceremony builds toward its climax. Despite appearances, these aren't random drunken revelries, but highly structured religious experiences designed to induce specific types of transcendence. The priestesses guide participants through escalating stages of ecstasy, ensuring that everyone reaches the divine madness safely and returns to ordinary consciousness with their sanity intact. It's like ancient crowd control, but with more wine and considerably more nudity. The central ritual involves a dramatic reenactment of Dionysiac's death and resurrection, performed by initiates who have temporarily become the god himself through wine, dance, and what can only be described as divine possession. You watch as an ordinary Athenian potter transforms into something otherworldly, his movements becoming impossibly graceful, his voice taking on qualities that seem to bypass rational thought and speak directly to something deeper. The Greeks understood that certain truths could only be accessed through altered states of consciousness, making these festivals essential religious technology rather than simple entertainment. The soundscape around you intensifies as drums synchronize with heartbeats and flutes weave melodies that seem to unlock previously hidden chambers of awareness. The acoustic properties of the grove have been carefully chosen to amplify and focus these effects, creating a natural amphitheater for transcendence. You feel your own inhibitions beginning to dissolve as the rhythms work their ancient magic, reminding you why these ceremonies were both beloved and feared throughout the ancient world. As the night progresses, you witness the famous sparagmos, the ritual tearing apart of a sacrificial victim that symbolizes the death and dismemberment of Dionysus himself. In earlier, more primitive versions of these mysteries, this may have involved actual human sacrifice, but by the classical period, the Greeks had evolved more civilized substitutes. Though watching grown adults tear apart a goat with their bare hands while in states of religious ecstasy still falls somewhat outside most people's comfort zones. The wine continues to flow as participants move through cycles of death and rebirth, experiencing the fundamental mystery of existence through their own transformed consciousness. You begin to understand why these festivals were considered essential to Greek spiritual life. They provided access to aspects of divine reality that couldn't be reached through conventional worship or rational philosophy. Sometimes you need to lose your mind to find your soul, a principle the Greeks elevated to high religious art. The dawn light, filtering through the olive branches, finds you exhausted but oddly renewed, having witnessed firsthand how the ancient Greeks used intoxication as a spiritual practice rather than mere recreation. The participants around you slowly return to their ordinary selves, though something in their eyes suggests they've brought back knowledge from wherever they've been traveling. The transformation back to everyday consciousness is gradual and gentle, guided by priestesses who understand the delicate process of integrating mystical experiences with mundane reality. As you walk back toward Athens in the early morning light, your feet unsteady from both wine and revelation, you carry with you the understanding that the Dionysiac Mysteries offered something essential that conventional religion couldn't provide: direct, personal experience of the divine through deliberate alteration of consciousness. It's a practice that would be simultaneously celebrated and condemned throughout history, suggesting that humans have always been drawn to transcendence, even when it comes with risks that would make modern liability lawyers weep into their contracts. You climb the winding mountain path to Delphi in the pre-dawn darkness, your breath creating small clouds in the crisp autumn air as you ascend toward the most famous oracle in the ancient world. The scent of laurel leaves and sulfur drifts down from the sacred precinct above, carried on winds that seem to whisper secrets from the earth itself. Below you, the valley spreads out like a dark sea, dotted with the occasional flicker of torches from other pilgrims making this same sacred journey. You're about to witness something that even the Greeks themselves didn't fully understand: the mysterious preparation rituals that transformed an ordinary woman into the voice of Apollo himself. The Pythia isn't born into her role through divine lottery or hereditary privilege. She's chosen through careful observation and rigorous testing that would make modern psychological evaluations seem casual. You watch as the current oracle, a middle-aged woman named Aphrodite, begins her morning purification in the sacred Castalian spring. The water bubbles up from deep underground, carrying minerals that leave a metallic taste and what some describe as a subtle euphoric effect. She's already fasted for 3 days, consuming only laurel leaves and sacred barley water, preparing her consciousness for the divine possession that awaits. The temple complex itself seems designed to induce altered states of consciousness, with its acoustic properties carefully engineered to amplify whispers and create unsettling echoes. You notice how sound behaves strangely here. Conversations from across the courtyard reach your ears with unnatural clarity, while your own voice seems to vanish into the mountain air. The Greeks were apparently early pioneers in psychoacoustic architecture, understanding that environment shapes perception in ways that can feel supernatural. As the sun rises over Mount Parnassus, you observe the elaborate purification rituals that prepare both the oracle and the sacred space for divine communication. Priests burn frankincense, myrrh, and something else, possibly hemp or other consciousness-altering herbs, creating a thick, aromatic smoke that makes your thoughts feel slightly detached from your body. The Pythia breathes deeply of these vapors while priests chant in ancient dialects that predate classical Greek, their voices creating harmonics that seem to resonate in your chest cavity. The oracle's transformation begins subtly, a slight tremor in her hands, a change in her breathing pattern, an unfocused quality to her gaze that suggests she's looking at something beyond the physical world. Historians still debate whether the famous vapors rising from the earth beneath the temple were simply volcanic gases, psychoactive compounds, or something else entirely. Recent geological surveys have identified ethylene seepage in the area, a sweet-smelling gas that can induce euphoria and hallucinations. Though skeptics argue this alone couldn't account for the oracle's apparently accurate prophecies. You're led into the inner sanctum where the actual consultation will take place. An underground chamber called the Adaton that feels like descending into the earth's womb. The air here is thick and warm, with a sweetish smell that makes your head feel light and your perceptions slightly unstable. The famous three-legged stool where the Pythia sits is positioned directly over a fissure in the rock, and you can feel warm air rising from deep underground, carrying scents that seem to bypass rational thought and speak directly to more primitive parts of your brain. The transformation of the Pythia into Apollo's mouthpiece is both dramatic and deeply unsettling. Her voice changes completely, becoming deeper and more resonant, while her manner shifts from the careful dignity of a religious professional to something wild and otherworldly. She speaks in riddles and metaphors, but with a conviction that suggests she's merely translating messages from a divine source rather than creating them herself. Watching this process, you understand why even skeptical philosophers like Cicero came away convinced they'd witnessed something genuinely supernatural. The consulting priests who interpret the oracle's pronouncements have developed sophisticated techniques for translating divine gibberish into practical advice, though historians still debate whether they were sincere believers or clever manipulators exploiting human gullibility. The ambiguous nature of most Delphic prophecies, "If you cross the river, a great army will be destroyed," suggests either divine wisdom that transcends simple yes or no answers, or extremely clever political hedging that keeps the oracle's reputation intact regardless of outcomes. You watch as pilgrims from across the Mediterranean present their questions, everything from personal relationship advice to matters of state policy that will affect thousands of lives. The democratic process here is refreshingly egalitarian. Your question gets the same divine attention whether you're a Spartan king or a Corinthian olive farmer, assuming you can afford the consultation fee and the required sacrificial offerings. Apollo apparently operates on a strict cash-and-carry basis. The psychological impact of receiving an oracle is profound, regardless of its ultimate accuracy. You observe how petitioners leave the sanctuary with renewed confidence in their chosen course of action. Having received what they perceive as divine validation for decisions they were probably going to make anyway. The oracle functions as much as ancient therapy as prophecy, providing external authority that helps people trust their own instincts. As the day's consultations wind down and the Pythia gradually returns to her ordinary consciousness, you witness the careful process of transitioning back to mundane reality. Priests monitor her closely, providing gentle guidance as she emerges from whatever realm she's been visiting. The transformation back is slower than the journey into divine possession, suggesting that bridging the gap between human and divine consciousness requires delicate handling in both directions. Walking back down the mountain as evening approaches, you carry with you the unsettling knowledge that you've witnessed something that defies easy categorization. Whether the Oracle of Delphi represents genuine divine communication, sophisticated psychological manipulation, or something else entirely, the experience has left you with a deeper appreciation for the mysterious aspects of human consciousness and the lengths to which people will go seeking guidance from sources beyond themselves. You find yourself standing in a moonlit barley field outside the ancient city of Eleusis, where the grain whispers secrets in a language older than words. The autumn harvest has just concluded, leaving stubble that crunches softly beneath your bare feet as you join other initiates in the sacred agricultural mysteries of Demeter. Tonight, you're about to experience rituals that promise something the Greeks desperately craved: concrete assurance that death isn't the final chapter of your story. The goddess of grain and growth has some rather compelling thoughts about cycles, renewal, and why you shouldn't panic about mortality just yet. The preparation for these mysteries begins at dawn with a ritual bath in the sacred stream that flows from Demeter's sanctuary. The water carries the mineral taste of deep earth and something floral, perhaps crushed narcissus petals, the flower associated with Persephone's abduction to the underworld. As you immerse yourself in the cold, clear water, you feel the shock of purification that separates ordinary consciousness from the heightened awareness required for divine revelation. The Greeks understood that transformation requires discomfort, though they were considerably more gentle about it than modern boot camps. Your fellow initiates represent a cross-section of Greek society that would normally never gather in the same place. Athenian aristocrats stand alongside Spartan warriors, while traveling merchants chat nervously with local farmers. The agricultural mysteries of Demeter transcended the usual social boundaries because everyone, regardless of political affiliation or economic status, needed assurance about the fundamental cycles of life and death. Starvation and mortality are remarkably democratic concerns. The ritual costume you're required to wear consists of a simple white tunic and a crown woven from barley stalks, marking you as temporarily outside normal social categories. The barley crown isn't just decorative. It connects you physically to the grain that sustains human life, while the white tunic symbolizes the purified state necessary for receiving divine knowledge. You notice how the rough texture of the barley against your forehead creates a constant tactile reminder of your connection to the agricultural cycle that governs both physical and spiritual nourishment. As evening approaches, you're led into an underground chamber carved from living rock, where the walls glisten with moisture that seems to pulse with its own inner light. The space smells of rich earth, burning olive oil, and something sweet, perhaps honey cakes offered to Demeter as symbols of the sweetness that follows agricultural labor. Historians still debate whether these chambers were natural caves adapted for religious use or artificial constructions designed to simulate the underworld experience, but the psychological effect is undeniably powerful. The central ritual involves a sacred drama depicting Demeter's grief over her lost daughter and the eventual reunion that brings spring back to the world. You watch as initiates take turns playing different roles in this cosmic story, experiencing firsthand the emotional journey from devastating loss through determined searching to joyful restoration. The Greeks understood that grief is the price of love, and that accepting this cycle is essential to spiritual maturity, though they were surprisingly sophisticated about the therapeutic value of communal emotional expression. The climax of the ceremony involves the revelation of sacred objects that apparently demonstrate the connection between grain, death, and resurrection in ways that bypass rational thought and speak directly to deeper levels of understanding. What exactly these objects were remains one of antiquity's best-kept secrets, but ancient sources suggest they included an ear of grain and possibly a representation of Persephone herself. The simplicity of the symbols contrasts dramatically with the complexity of the emotions they evoke, proving that the most profound truths often require the simplest expressions. You participate in the ritual consumption of kykeon, a barley drink that serves both as communion with the goddess and possibly as a consciousness-altering substance that facilitates mystical experience. The drink tastes earthy and slightly bitter, with an aftertaste that seems to linger at the back of your throat like a whispered promise. Modern scholars debate whether kykeon contained ergot or other psychoactive compounds, but the psychological preparation and ritual context would have been sufficient to induce altered states even without chemical assistance. The transformation that follows is subtle but profound, a gradual shift in perception that makes ordinary reality seem transparent, revealing underlying patterns of connection between all living things. You begin to understand how the Greeks could find genuine comfort in agricultural metaphors for human mortality, seeing death not as termination, but as the necessary precursor to new forms of life. It's remarkably similar to modern ecological thinking, though considerably more mystical in its emotional impact. As the night progresses, you experience what ancient sources describe as a state of blessed assurance about your cosmic destiny. The fear of death that normally haunts human consciousness dissolves into understanding that individual existence participates in larger cycles that transcend personal mortality. You're not just a separate being facing inevitable extinction, but part of an ongoing process of renewal that connects you to the fundamental creative forces of the universe. The dawn light filtering into the chamber finds you exhausted but strangely peaceful, carrying with you the promise that has sustained mystery initiates for centuries, that apparent endings are actually beginnings, that separation is temporary, and that the love which creates life is stronger than the forces that seem to destroy it. Walking back through the barley fields as the sun rises, you understand why these agricultural mysteries were considered essential preparation for a meaningful life, offering reassurance that transcends both rational doubt and emotional despair. You step off the wooden boat onto the rocky shores of Samothrace, where the Aegean Sea crashes against cliffs that have witnessed more secrets than any ancient gossip column could contain. The salt spray stings your face as you follow the winding path up to the sanctuary of the great gods, where mysteries so exclusive they made the Eleusinian rites look like a neighborhood book club. The wind carries the scent of wild thyme and burning cedar, mixed with something that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. The unmistakable atmosphere of a place where powerful people come to confess their deepest fears and receive divine protection they can't find anywhere else. The Kabirian Mysteries of Samothrace attracted a guest list that reads like ancient Greece's version of a celebrity charity gala. Philip II of Macedon met his future wife Olympias here. Their son Alexander the Great later sought initiation, and even Romans like Cicero and Emperor Hadrian made the journey to this remote island. You can't help but wonder what exactly was happening in these ceremonies that made hardened military commanders and cynical politicians willing to travel hundreds of miles for spiritual reassurance. Apparently, even ancient conquerors had anxiety issues that required divine intervention. The sanctuary complex sprawls across several terraces carved into the mountainside, with buildings designed to accommodate both the practical needs of large-scale initiation ceremonies and the psychological requirements of profound spiritual transformation. You notice how the architecture creates a sense of progressive revelation. Each building you enter prepares you for increasingly intense experiences, while carefully controlling what you can see of the sacred areas that lie ahead. The Greeks understood that anticipation is half of any good mystical experience, though they were considerably more sophisticated about building suspense than modern thriller movies. Your guide explains that unlike most Greek mystery religions, the Kabirian rites were available to people of all backgrounds, citizens and slaves, Greeks and barbarians. Men and women could all seek initiation regardless of their social status or ethnic origin. This democratic approach to salvation was revolutionary for its time, suggesting that whatever divine protection these mysteries offered was considered too important to be restricted by conventional social boundaries. It's refreshingly progressive for a culture that otherwise had some rather strict opinions about who deserved access to various privileges. The preparation rituals begin with a confession session that would make modern therapy seem casual and non-invasive. You're required to reveal your worst deeds and deepest fears to the attending priests, who apparently maintained confidentiality standards that lasted for centuries. We still don't know what specific crimes and anxieties these initiates confessed. The psychological relief of unburdening yourself to divine representatives who promise absolute forgiveness creates an emotional clean slate that prepares you for the transformative experiences ahead. As evening approaches, you're led into the circular building called the Eleusinian, where the main initiation ceremony takes place under a dome that creates remarkable acoustic effects. The slightest whisper carries clearly to every participant, while louder sounds create harmonics that seem to resonate in your chest cavity. You begin to understand why mystery religions invested so heavily in architectural psychology. The building itself becomes a tool for inducing altered states of consciousness, making the boundary between physical and spiritual reality increasingly permeable. The ceremony involves dramatic reenactments of divine stories that focus on themes of death, resurrection, and divine protection, performed by initiates who temporarily embody the great gods themselves. Historians still debate the exact identity of these deities. They seem to be pre-Greek in origin, possibly Thracian or Anatolian gods who were absorbed into Greek religious practice. Watching these ancient dramas unfold, you realize you're witnessing religious syncretism in action as different cultural traditions blend into something uniquely powerful. The climax of the initiation involves receiving a purple sash that marks you as under divine protection, particularly from dangers at sea. This wasn't merely symbolic. The sacred belt was believed to provide actual supernatural defense against shipwreck, piracy, and other maritime hazards that made ancient travel genuinely terrifying. Given that most long-distance travel in the ancient world was by ship, this divine insurance policy had obvious practical value for anyone planning to venture beyond their hometown. You participate in sacred meals that create bonds of mutual obligation among initiates, establishing a network of support that transcends normal social divisions. The food itself is simple: bread, wine, and honey cakes. But the ritual context transforms ordinary nourishment into communion with divine forces and fellowship with other seekers of protection. You're not just eating. You're joining a spiritual family that will provide assistance and refuge wherever you travel in the ancient world. The psychological transformation that follows initiation is subtle but profound. A sense of being watched over by benevolent powers that provides genuine comfort in facing life's uncertainties. Whether this protection is objectively real or simply the result of enhanced confidence and expanded social networks, the practical benefits for ancient initiates were substantial. Mystery religions offered something that conventional civic worship couldn't provide: personal divine attention that addressed individual rather than collective needs. As dawn breaks over the Aegean and you prepare to leave this sacred island, you carry with you not just the purple sash that marks your initiation, but a transformed understanding of your place in a cosmos that includes both visible and invisible sources of support. The boat journey back to the mainland feels different now, less like venturing into uncertain dangers and more like traveling under divine escort through a world where you're no longer entirely alone. You descend into an underground burial chamber outside Athens, where the flickering light of oil lamps reveals walls covered in strange symbols and passwords that would make ancient afterlife customs seem like the world's most elaborate security system. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh and papyrus, while somewhere in the darkness, you can hear the soft rustle of someone consulting ancient texts that contain detailed instructions for navigating the underworld. Welcome to Orphic Death Preparation, where dying well requires considerably more planning than your average Greek funeral, and where the afterlife operates on a strict need-to-know basis that makes modern classified documents look refreshingly transparent. The Orphic Mysteries emerge from the legendary musician Orpheus, whose journey to retrieve his wife from death created a religious movement obsessed with what happens after your final breath. You watch as initiates memorize elaborate passwords, sacred phrases, and ritual procedures that will supposedly help them navigate the complex bureaucracy of the underworld. Apparently, even death requires proper documentation, though the paperwork is written on gold tablets and buried with your corpse rather than filed with municipal authorities. Your instructor tonight is an elderly priest whose fingers are stained with ink from copying sacred texts, and whose voice carries the particular authority of someone who has spent decades preparing people for an experience he won't personally undergo for several more years. He explains that dying without proper Orphic preparation is like showing up to an exclusive party without knowing the dress code, the guest list, or the secret handshake. Technically possible, but likely to result in social embarrassment that lasts for eternity. The gold tablets that will be placed in your mouth at death contain detailed instructions for the soul's journey through the underworld, including warnings about which paths to avoid and which deities to approach for assistance. These aren't abstract spiritual guidelines, but specific, practical directions that read like ancient GPS instructions for the afterlife. When you reach the spring guarded by white cypress trees, don't drink from it no matter how thirsty you are, because that's the water of forgetfulness and you'll lose all memory of your divine nature. Sounds like exactly the kind of crucial travel tip that would be easy to overlook in the stress of recently being dead. You practice the sacred phrases that identify you as an Orphic initiate to the underworld authorities. I'm a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. The password apparently works like an ancient spiritual passport, demonstrating that you understand your dual nature as both mortal being and eternal soul. Historians still debate whether these formulas represent genuine religious beliefs or sophisticated psychological techniques for reducing death anxiety. But watching initiates gain confidence through memorization. The practical benefits seem obvious regardless of metaphysical accuracy. The ritual purification required for Orphic initiation involves dietary restrictions that would challenge modern vegans. No meat, no beans, no certain vegetables, and definitely no eggs, which were considered potential sources of reincarnated souls. You spend weeks consuming only fruits, honey, and specific grains while avoiding anything that might contain a transmigrated relative. The Greeks took reincarnation seriously enough to make dinner planning genuinely complicated, though they were considerably more flexible about wine consumption than later ascetic traditions. The underground chamber where these preparations take place feels like a combination library, tomb, and spiritual training facility. Scrolls containing Orphic hymns line the walls, while practice burial chambers allow initiates to rehearse the death experience in controlled conditions. You lie in a stone sarcophagus while priests recite the prayers that will guide your soul through its post-mortem journey, creating a dress rehearsal for mortality that removes much of the uncertainty from dying. The centerpiece of Orphic preparation involves learning the geography of the underworld with the precision of a classical scholar studying ancient maps. You memorize the locations of various rivers, the functions of different judges, and the proper protocols for approaching Persephone, who apparently serves as a kind of divine immigration officer for souls seeking admission to the blessed afterlife. The level of detail suggests that either the Orphics had remarkably specific information about post-mortem reality, or they were the ancient world's most creative religious fiction writers. As your initiation progresses, you begin to understand that Orphic death preparation serves psychological functions that transcend its theological claims. The elaborate procedures provide a sense of control over mortality's ultimate uncertainty, while the community of fellow initiates offers support for facing fears that most people prefer to ignore. Whether the passwords actually work in the afterlife becomes less important than their effectiveness in reducing death anxiety during life. The culmination of your training involves receiving the gold tablet that will accompany you to the grave, inscribed with your personal spiritual passport for the underworld journey ahead. The weight of the precious metal feels substantial in your palm, while the tiny script contains everything you need to know for navigating posthumous bureaucracy. It's like having cosmic traveler's insurance, assuming the cosmos operates according to ancient Greek administrative principles. Walking back through the Athens streets as dawn approaches, you carry with you the peculiar comfort of being thoroughly prepared for an experience that remains fundamentally unknowable. The Orphic Mysteries offer something that conventional Greek religion couldn't provide: detailed practical guidance for the ultimate transition that every human being must eventually face. Whether their maps of the afterlife are accurate becomes secondary to the confidence that comes from feeling prepared for mortality's greatest adventure. You stand in a torchlit grove on the sacred island of Lesbos, where the night air shimmers with rose petals and anticipation as you prepare to witness the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage that bridges the gap between mortal love and divine union. The scent of burning sandalwood mingles with the salt breeze from the nearby sea, while somewhere in the darkness, you can hear the soft rustle of silk garments and whispered prayers that sound suspiciously like ancient wedding vows with cosmic implications. Tonight, you're about to observe how the Greeks turned human sexuality into a religious sacrament that would make modern relationship counselors reach for their notepad and possibly their therapist. The sacred marriage ceremony represents one of humanity's oldest religious concepts: the idea that divine forces require periodic renewal through ritualized sexual union, performed by human representatives who temporarily embody the gods themselves. You watch as the chosen participants undergo elaborate purification rituals involving sacred oils, flower crowns, and prayers that transform ordinary mortals into divine surrogates. It's like ancient method acting, but with considerably higher stakes and definitely more nudity than your average community theater production. The woman selected to represent the goddess moves through the preparatory rituals with a grace that suggests she understands the cosmic significance of her role. Her body is anointed with oils scented with jasmine and myrrh, while her hair is braided with gold threads that catch the firelight like captured starbeams. The transformation isn't merely cosmetic. You can see her ordinary personality gradually dissolving into something larger and more archetypal, as if she's becoming a living vessel for divine feminine energy. Her male counterpart undergoes similar preparations, though his ritual costume emphasizes strength and fertility rather than beauty and receptivity. His chest is painted with sacred symbols that identify him as the god's earthly representative, while his movements become increasingly stylized and ceremonial. Watching this transformation, you begin to understand how the Greeks could view sexual union as genuine religious experience rather than mere physical pleasure. The participants are no longer simply themselves, but embodiments of cosmic creative forces. The sacred grove where the ceremony takes place has been carefully designed to evoke the primordial garden where gods first discovered love. Ancient olive trees create natural chambers draped with silk curtains, while the ground is carpeted with rose petals and soft grasses that feel like divine upholstery beneath your bare feet. Historians still debate whether these sacred marriages involved actual sexual consummation or symbolic representation, but the sensual atmosphere suggests the Greeks weren't particularly interested in maintaining strict boundaries between metaphor and reality. As the ritual reaches its climax, you observe how the union of the divine representatives is understood to ensure fertility for the entire community. Not just human reproduction, but the renewal of crops, the prosperity of herds, and the general abundance that sustains civilized life. The personal becomes cosmic, while the intimate act of love transforms into a public service that benefits everyone. It's remarkably similar to modern ecological thinking about interconnection, though considerably more theatrical in its execution. The ceremony involves elaborate choreography that builds toward the moment of sacred union, with music, dance, and incantations that create an atmosphere of mounting spiritual intensity. The participants move through stylized gestures that represent the cosmic dance of creation, while witnesses maintain respectful distance that preserves both the sacred nature of the experience and basic human modesty. You find yourself understanding how sexuality could be viewed as divine gift rather than shameful necessity, a perspective that challenges many contemporary assumptions about the relationship between spirituality and physical pleasure. The psychological impact of witnessing sacred marriage extends beyond the immediate participants to include the entire community, who experience renewed confidence in the cosmic order that governs both personal relationships and collective prosperity. The ritual provides reassurance that the fundamental creative forces of the universe remain active and benevolent, working through human love to maintain the conditions necessary for flourishing life. As the ceremony concludes and the participants gradually return to their ordinary identities, you observe the careful transition from sacred to mundane consciousness. Priests and priestesses guide the divine representatives back to normal awareness through gentle rituals that honor their service, while helping them reintegrate their transformed experience with everyday reality. The process suggests sophisticated understanding of the psychological challenges involved in moving between ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness. The dawn light, filtering through the olive branches, finds the sacred grove peaceful and renewed, with flower petals scattered like blessings across ground that has witnessed the eternal mystery of divine love made manifest through human devotion. Walking back toward the harbor as fishing boats prepare for their morning voyage, you carry with you a deeper appreciation for how the Greeks understood sexuality as sacred gift rather than guilty pleasure, a perspective that elevated physical love into spiritual practice and transformed intimate relationships into vehicles for cosmic renewal. You slip through the shadows of ancient Athens on a crisp October evening, following a group of women whose quiet laughter carries secrets that would scandalize half the city and confuse the other half. The air smells of ripening olives and something earthier, the unmistakable scent of fertility rituals that have been carefully hidden from male eyes for centuries. Tonight, you're about to witness the Thesmophoria, the most exclusive women's festival in ancient Greece, where respectable matrons temporarily abandon their domestic duties to engage in behavior that would make their husbands reach for the wine and possibly reconsider some fundamental assumptions about feminine propriety. The Thesmophoria belongs entirely to married women, creating a rare space in Greek society where female religious authority operates independently of male oversight. You watch as Athenian wives who normally compete for social status through elaborate dinner parties and expensive jewelry suddenly become collaborators in rituals that celebrate feminine power in its most elemental forms. It's like discovering that your neighbor's book club is actually a coven, except the magic involves agricultural fertility and the books are written in menstrual blood and pig sacrifice. The festival begins with a procession to the sacred grove outside the city, where the women carry mysterious baskets whose contents remain hidden beneath white cloth. The weight of these containers suggests something substantial, possibly the sacred implements that will transform ordinary housewives into priestesses of Demeter and Persephone. Your guide explains that men who attempt to spy on these proceedings face severe punishment, including possible death, making this one of the few areas of Greek religious life where masculine curiosity encounters absolute boundaries. The ritual purification that begins the festival involves bathing in a sacred spring that supposedly connects directly to the underworld waters where Persephone was abducted by Hades. The women strip away their regular clothing and jewelry, transforming from identifiable individuals into anonymous participants in a drama that transcends personal identity. You notice how their voices change as they move through the purification, becoming deeper, more primal, as if they're channeling aspects of feminine divinity that civilized society normally keeps carefully contained. The centerpiece of the Thesmophoria involves the retrieval of sacred objects that were buried during the previous year's festival. Specifically, the remains of pigs that were thrown into underground chambers called megara and left to decompose alongside models of snakes and male genitalia. The symbolism is remarkably direct. Death and decay provide the foundation for new life, while feminine reproductive power connects directly to agricultural fertility. It's essentially ancient composting with cosmic implications, though considerably more ritualized than your average community garden project. You watch as the women descend into these sacred pits to retrieve the decomposed offerings, which will be mixed with grain seeds to ensure abundant harvests in the coming year. The smell rising from these chambers would challenge even the strongest stomach, but the participants approach their task with religious reverence that transforms disgusting necessity into sacred duty. Historians still debate whether this ritual reflects ancient agricultural knowledge about composting or purely symbolic thinking about death and renewal, but the practical results apparently justify the olfactory challenges. The festival's second day, called Nestiae, involves complete fasting and ritual expressions of grief that reenact Demeter's sorrow over her lost daughter. The women sit on the ground in attitudes of mourning, abstaining from food, wine, and even water, while chanting lamentations that would make professional mourners seem cheerful by comparison. The psychological intensity of communal grieving creates bonds among the participants that transcend normal social boundaries, while the shared experience of deliberate suffering provides cathartic release for personal sorrows that ordinary life doesn't adequately address. The final day transforms grief into celebration as the women feast on food specifically associated with fertility and abundance. Pomegranates, figs, honey cakes shaped like reproductive organs, and wine that has been blessed by the priestesses of Demeter. The contrast between fasting and feasting creates a psychological pendulum that swings from deprivation to gratitude, making ordinary pleasures feel like divine gifts. You begin to understand how temporary suffering can intensify subsequent joy, a principle the Greeks elevated to high religious art through carefully orchestrated emotional manipulation. The psychological transformation that occurs during the Thesmophoria extends beyond the festival itself, creating lasting changes in how the participants understand their roles as wives, mothers, and guardians of civilized life. The experience of exercising independent religious authority provides a counterbalance to the domestic subordination that normally defines their social position, while the celebration of feminine reproductive power offers validation for contributions that patriarchal society often takes for granted. As the festival concludes and the women prepare to return to their domestic responsibilities, you observe the careful transition from sacred to ordinary consciousness. The process involves gradual reintegration of personal identity, practical planning for implementing the fertility magic in their household gardens, and mutual promises to maintain the secrecy that protects this rare space of feminine autonomy. Walking back toward the city as dawn approaches, the women carry with them renewed confidence in their essential role in maintaining the cosmic order that sustains both family and community life. You descend through a hidden entrance carved into the rocky hillside outside Aegina, where the air grows thick and humid as you move deeper into chambers that smell of damp earth and ancient offerings. The flickering light of your oil lamp reveals walls blackened by centuries of sacrifice, while somewhere in the darkness ahead, you can hear the low murmur of voices speaking in dialects that predate Homer. Tonight, you're entering the realm of chthonic worship, The underground religious practices dedicated to deities who rule the shadowy territories beneath the surface world, where the normal rules of Olympic religion don't apply and where asking the wrong questions might get you more answers than you bargained for. The chthonic gods operate according to different principles than their sky-dwelling relatives, demanding offerings that would make Zeus reach for his lightning bolts in disapproval. You watch as worshippers pour libations of honey, wine, and blood directly into cracks in the earth, feeding deities who remain permanently invisible but apparently perpetually hungry. The Greeks understood that maintaining cosmic balance required acknowledging both the bright Olympian powers and the darker forces that govern death, fertility, and the mysterious processes that sustain life from below ground. Your guide tonight is a priestess whose hands are permanently stained with the dark earth that serves as her primary ritual material. She explains that chthonic worship attracts people seeking solutions to problems that conventional religion can't address. Infertility, persistent illnesses, family curses, and the kind of deep psychological wounds that require supernatural intervention. It's essentially ancient therapy for issues that exist below the threshold of ordinary consciousness, though the treatment methods would definitely violate modern medical ethics. The underground shrine where these rituals take place feels like descending into the Earth's digestive system, with narrow passages that open into chambers designed to amplify whispers and create acoustic effects that make your own voice sound alien and otherworldly. The walls glisten with moisture that might be condensation or might be something more mysterious, while the floor is carpeted with offerings that crunch softly beneath your feet. Historians still debate whether these underground spaces were natural caves or artificial constructions, but the psychological impact of being literally beneath the normal world creates immediate separation from ordinary consciousness. The ritual begins with invocations directed downward into the earth rather than upward toward the sky, reversing the normal orientation of Greek prayer in ways that feel fundamentally transgressive. You find yourself kneeling on the stone floor while chanting names that sound like they were borrowed from nightmares. Hecate, Persephone, Demeter Melena, and other deities whose domains include the uncomfortable aspects of existence that polite society prefers to ignore. The experience challenges conventional assumptions about divine benevolence, acknowledging powers that might be helpful but definitely aren't safe. The centerpiece of chthonic worship involves animal sacrifices that emphasize blood and earth rather than the fire and air preferred by Olympian religion. You watch as black sheep and pigs are slaughtered directly over trenches that allow their blood to seep into the underground realm, where the chthonic gods presumably receive these offerings with satisfaction. The smell of blood mingles with incense and damp earth, creating an olfactory experience that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to more primitive parts of your nervous system. The participants in these underground ceremonies represent a cross-section of people dealing with desperate circumstances that conventional religion hasn't addressed adequately. You notice farmers whose crops have failed despite proper sacrifices to Demeter, women struggling with infertility, families haunted by generational curses, and individuals suffering from mental illnesses that seem to require supernatural rather than medical intervention. The chthonic gods apparently specialize in the problems that fall through the cracks of ordinary divine administration. As the night progresses, you experience the peculiar psychological effects of extended time in underground spaces, a gradual dissolution of normal spatial orientation combined with heightened sensitivity to sounds, smells, and tactile sensations. The boundary between inner and outer reality becomes increasingly permeable, while the darkness seems to develop its own presence that participates actively in the ritual proceedings. You begin to understand why mystery religions invested so heavily in controlling environmental conditions to facilitate altered states of consciousness. The climax of the ceremony involves direct communication with chthonic deities through dream incubation, divination, and practices that would make modern psychiatrists reach for their prescription pads. Participants lie on the earth floor while priests and priestesses guide them through visualization exercises designed to establish contact with underground powers who communicate through symbols, physical sensations, and insights that arrive without rational explanation. Whether these experiences represent genuine divine communication or sophisticated psychological techniques becomes less important than their effectiveness in providing guidance for seemingly impossible problems. As dawn approaches and you prepare to return to the surface world, you carry with you a transformed understanding of the Greek religious cosmos that includes both light and shadow, creation and destruction, the powers that sustain life and the forces that reclaim it. The Chthonic mysteries offer something that conventional worship can't provide: acknowledgement that existence includes dark territories that require their own forms of reverence and negotiation. Emerging into the morning sunlight feels like being reborn into a world that suddenly seems more complex and mysterious than it appeared before your underground journey. The ordinary landscape carries hints of the hidden realm that exists beneath its surface, while your own consciousness retains traces of contact with powers that operate according to principles that transcend conventional understanding of divine benevolence and cosmic justice. You begin your ascent up the ancient path to Mount Lycaon in Arcadia, where the morning mist clings to pine branches like the breath of sleeping gods, and where every footstep takes you further from the civilized world into territories that even the Greeks approached with careful reverence. The thin mountain air carries the scent of wild herbs and something indefinable, perhaps the lingering presence of rituals so old they predate written history, performed in places where the boundary between earth and sky dissolves into something that makes ordinary consciousness feel quaint and inadequate. The sacred mountain ceremonies of ancient Greece represented humanity's earliest attempts to communicate with divine powers by literally getting closer to where the gods presumably lived, though the climb required considerably more physical fitness than your average religious experience. You pause to catch your breath and notice how the landscape changes as you ascend. Cultivated fields give way to wild forests. Familiar sounds fade into an almost supernatural silence, and the air itself seems to develop a crystalline quality that makes everything appear more vivid and immediate. Your fellow pilgrims represent a mix of shepherds seeking protection for their flocks, warriors preparing for battle, and individuals dealing with personal crises that require divine intervention unavailable through conventional urban worship. The mountain gods apparently specialized in problems that couldn't be solved at sea level, offering the kind of remote customer service that required serious commitment from their petitioners. It's like ancient spiritual tech support, but with significantly better views and considerably more walking. The ritual preparations begin at dawn in a sacred grove near the summit, where ancient olive trees grow in patterns that suggest either careful cultivation or supernatural landscaping. You notice how sound behaves differently at this altitude. Your voice seems to carry further while simultaneously feeling more intimate, as if the thin air creates acoustic conditions that facilitate communication with beings who exist partially outside normal space-time. The Greeks understood that environment shapes consciousness, making location an essential component of effective divine contact. The ceremonies themselves involve offerings that emphasize the mountain's liminal position between earth and sky. Incense that carries prayers upward on the wind, libations poured directly onto bare rock that connects to underground springs, and sacrifices whose smoke rises into atmospheric conditions that blur the distinction between natural and supernatural phenomena. You watch as ordinary bread and wine transform into cosmic communications through careful attention to altitude, weather, and the psychological effects of physical exertion combined with spiritual anticipation. The centerpiece of mountain worship involves rituals performed at specific times when atmospheric conditions create natural light shows that would make modern special effects teams weep with envy. Dawn and sunset transform the peaks into stages where divine presence becomes almost visible, while sudden weather changes create dramatic backdrops that convince even skeptical participants they're witnessing supernatural manifestations. Historians still debate whether the Greeks deliberately timed their mountain ceremonies to coincide with predictable meteorological phenomena, but the psychological impact suggests sophisticated understanding of how environment influences religious experience. As you participate in the sacred dances performed on rocky platforms that project into empty air, you begin to understand how physical vulnerability enhances spiritual openness. The combination of altitude, exertion, and exposure to elements that could easily prove fatal creates psychological conditions that dissolve ordinary boundaries between self and cosmos. You're not just performing religious rituals. You're engaging in extreme spiritual sports that require both physical courage and metaphysical commitment. The mountain's wildlife participates in these ceremonies in ways that suggest either remarkable training or genuine supernatural involvement. Eagles circle the sacred areas during key moments, while mountain goats observe the proceedings with attention that seems almost deliberate. The Greeks interpreted these behaviors as signs of divine approval, though modern naturalists would probably offer more mundane explanations involving territory, feeding patterns, and the curious effects of human activity on animal behavior. The descent from the sacred peak creates a gradual transition back to ordinary consciousness that allows participants to integrate their mountaintop experiences with everyday reality. You notice how the landscape seems different now, less alien and threatening, more familiar and protective, as if the mountain has accepted you as part of its extended spiritual family. The psychological transformation extends beyond the immediate religious experience to include lasting changes in how you understand your relationship with natural forces that normally remain invisible. As you reach the lower elevations where cultivated fields resume and human habitation becomes visible again, you carry with you the peculiar confidence that comes from successful communication with powers that operate outside normal social boundaries. The mountain ceremonies offer something that urban religion can't provide: direct contact with divine forces in their natural habitat, unmediated by human institutions or conventional religious bureaucracy. Walking back towards civilization as the sun sets behind the peaks you've just ascended, you understand why the Greeks considered mountain worship essential preparation for dealing with life's ultimate challenges. The experience provides both practical courage for facing physical dangers and spiritual reassurance about your place in a cosmos that includes forces far more powerful and benevolent than everyday concerns would suggest. You cross the marble threshold of the Academy in Athens, where the late afternoon sun filters through olive branches and illuminates a world where learning to think properly requires first learning to die properly. Metaphorically speaking, though the philosophical rigor might make you occasionally wish for the literal version. The air carries the scent of papyrus scrolls and olive oil from the lamps that burn late into the night, mixed with something that might be intellectual anxiety or might just be the natural aroma of people spending too much time thinking about existence. Welcome to the mystery schools, where getting your philosophical degree requires considerably more than tuition money and a tolerance for boring lectures. The philosophical mysteries operate on the principle that true knowledge can't simply be transmitted through normal teaching methods, but must be discovered through carefully orchestrated experiences that transform the seeker's consciousness from the inside out. You watch as prospective initiates undergo preliminary testing that would make modern graduate school admissions seem casual and non-invasive. The entrance requirements include demonstrated virtue, intellectual capacity, and psychological stability sufficient to handle revelations that might fundamentally alter your understanding of reality. No pressure or anything. Your guide through this intellectual labyrinth is an elderly philosopher whose eyes carry the particular gleam of someone who has stared directly into ultimate truth and lived to tell about it, though the telling apparently requires a considerable circumlocution and strategic use of metaphors. He explains that the mysteries taught in these schools aren't just academic subjects, but transformative practices designed to awaken dormant capacities of human consciousness that normal education doesn't even acknowledge, let alone develop. The curriculum begins with mathematical mysteries that reveal the hidden harmonies governing both cosmic order and human psychology. You spend hours contemplating geometric relationships that somehow transform abstract numbers into doorways for transcendent understanding, proving that even ancient Greeks understood the spiritual applications of really good math. The Pythagoreans apparently discovered that numerical ratios could induce mystical experiences, making them perhaps history's first mathematical mystics, though their prohibition against eating beans suggests they had some rather specific ideas about dietary requirements for cosmic enlightenment. The preparatory disciplines require physical, mental, and ethical purification that would challenge modern lifestyle choices in fundamental ways. You follow a regimen involving specific foods, musical practices, breathing exercises, and ethical guidelines that gradually attune your consciousness to subtler levels of reality than ordinary awareness can access. Historians still debate whether these practices were based on genuine psychological insight or elaborate systems of spiritual placebo effects. But watching the transformation in long-term students suggests the methods produce measurable results regardless of theoretical explanations. The heart of mystery school education involves direct initiation into philosophical principles through experiential encounters that bypass rational thought and speak directly to intuitive understanding. You participate in rituals that use dramatic presentations, symbolic objects, and carefully controlled environmental conditions to convey truths that apparently can't be communicated through normal language. It's like ancient immersive theater designed for epistemological transformation, though considerably more serious than contemporary experimental performance art. The teaching methods involve progressive revelation through stages that correspond to different levels of psychological and spiritual development. You advance from preliminary purification through intermediate contemplative practices to final initiation into mysteries that supposedly provide direct knowledge of ultimate reality. The process takes years and requires dedication that would make modern doctoral programs seem like weekend workshops. But the promised results include wisdom that transcends normal intellectual accomplishment. As your training progresses, you begin to understand that the mystery schools weren't just educational institutions, but spiritual hospitals designed to heal the fundamental alienation that separates ordinary consciousness from its cosmic context. The philosophical practices function as medicine for existential anxiety, while the community of fellow seekers provides support for undertaking psychological transformations that would be impossible in isolation. You're not just learning about reality, you're being systematically reconstructed to perceive dimensions of existence that remain invisible to normal awareness. The climax of mystery school initiation involves experiences that ancient sources describe as divine illumination, direct recognition of the eternal principles that govern both personal identity and cosmic order. Whether these revelations represent genuine mystical insight or sophisticated psychological conditioning becomes less important than their effectiveness in producing graduates who demonstrate unusual wisdom, compassion, and practical effectiveness in dealing with life's challenges. The integration phase of mystery school education focuses on learning to apply transcendent insights to ordinary circumstances without losing either practical effectiveness or mystical understanding. You practice techniques for maintaining expanded awareness while engaging in normal social activities, discovering that true wisdom involves being simultaneously in the world and beyond it. The goal isn't escape from mundane reality, but transformation of how consciousness relates to everyday experience. As you prepare to leave the academy and apply your mystery school training to life outside these sheltered philosophical gardens, you carry with you transformed understanding of human potential and cosmic purpose that will influence every aspect of your future development. The education you've received transcends normal academic accomplishment, providing tools for ongoing spiritual evolution that will continue working long after formal study ends. You push through the curtain of hanging willow branches into a sacred grove that feels like stepping inside the earth's own jewelry box, where dappled sunlight creates patterns that shift and dance across moss-covered stones older than Athens itself. The air here carries the green scent of growing things mixed with something indefinably wild. The presence of nature spirits who've been receiving offerings and observing human folly since before your ancestors learned to make proper wine. Tonight, you're entering one of Greece's most secretive religious spaces, where the trees themselves serve as priests, and where asking for divine favor requires understanding that some deities prefer their worship unpaved, unroofed, and definitely uncontrolled by municipal authorities. The sacred groves represented a form of religious practice that predated temple architecture by centuries, preserving approaches to divinity that emphasized natural rather than artificial sacred spaces. You notice how different your consciousness feels surrounded by living pillars that breathe and grow rather than carved stone columns that simply stand there looking impressive. The trees create a cathedral where the ceiling moves with wind and weather, while the floor cushions your steps with decades of accumulated leaves that rustle their own ancient hymns. Your guide tonight is a woodland priestess whose hair is braided with ivy and whose knowledge of plant spirits would make modern herbalists reach for their field notebooks and possibly reconsider some career choices. She explains that grove worship requires different skills than conventional temple religion. The ability to communicate with beings who operate according to seasonal rather than social rhythms. Patience for rituals that unfold according to natural timing rather than human scheduling, and comfort with divine encounters that can't be controlled or predicted with administrative precision. The ritual preparations involve gathering specific plants whose properties range from medicinal to mildly hallucinogenic, though the distinction becomes somewhat academic when you're dealing with nature spirits who apparently don't recognize modern pharmaceutical categories. You help collect oak leaves at dawn, mistletoe at noon, and night-blooming herbs at sunset, creating a botanical timeline that attunes your consciousness to the daily cycles that govern life in ways that urban existence normally conceals. It's like ancient aromatherapy with cosmic implications, though considerably more labor-intensive than your average spa treatment. The centerpiece of grove worship involves offerings that emphasize reciprocity with natural systems rather than one-way supplications to distant deities. You pour honey at the base of ancient oaks, scatter grain that will feed both spirits and wildlife, and hang ribbons that will gradually weather into components of birds' nests. The practice recognizes that humans exist within rather than above natural networks, making religious ritual a form of ecological participation rather than supernatural petition. As evening deepens and the forest sounds shift from day to night inhabitants, you experience how grove ceremonies create communion with beings whose existence operates according to principles that transcend human understanding. The rustle of leaves becomes a form of divine communication, while the movement of shadows suggests presences that remain just beyond the threshold of ordinary perception. Historians still debate whether ancient Greeks actually believed in nature spirits or used them as metaphors for ecological principles. But sitting in darkness that seems alive with intentional awareness, the distinction feels less important than respectful attention to whatever is actually present. The sacred dances performed in these natural temples follow choreography that mimics seasonal cycles, animal movements, and the growth patterns of various plants. You find yourself swaying like wind-blown branches, stepping in rhythms that echo heartbeats and tidal flows, while your voice joins harmonies that seem to emerge from the forest itself rather than human vocal cords. The experience dissolves the boundary between performer and environment, making worship a collaborative creation between human consciousness and natural forces. The psychological effects of extended time in sacred groves include heightened sensitivity to subtle environmental changes, increased awareness of interconnection between apparently separate phenomena, and what can only be described as expanded empathy that includes non-human forms of consciousness. You begin to understand how the Greeks could view trees, springs, and animals as divine beings rather than mere resources, developing relationships with natural features that transcended utilitarian considerations. The grove ceremonies reach their climax during the liminal hours when day transitions to night, creating natural circumstances that facilitate communication with beings who exist at the boundaries between visible and invisible realms. The quality of light, the behavior of animals, and the acoustics of wind through leaves combine to create conditions that make transcendent experiences feel natural rather than supernatural. You realize that the ancients understood principles of consciousness alteration that modern technology tries to replicate through artificial means. As dawn approaches and you prepare to leave this enchanted sanctuary, you carry with you transformed understanding of humanity's relationship with natural systems that include both material and spiritual dimensions. The Grove worship offers something that urban religion can't provide: direct participation in the living networks that sustain both physical and psychological well-being, reminding you that divinity manifests through natural processes rather than existing separate from them. Walking back towards civilization through forests that now seem populated with friendly presences rather than empty wilderness, you understand why the Greeks considered grove worship essential preparation for living harmoniously within rather than against the natural world that remains humanity's primary source of both physical sustenance and spiritual nourishment. You weave through the packed streets of Athens on a sweltering July morning, following the surge of humanity that flows toward the Acropolis like a river of white tunics and excited chatter. The air shimmers with heat and anticipation as you join the procession for the Great Panathenea, Athens' most spectacular festival that supposedly celebrates the goddess Athena, but actually reveals more about Athenian civic pride than divine devotion. What the guidebooks don't mention, and what foreign visitors never quite grasp, is that beneath the public pageantry lies a labyrinth of secret rituals that would make the official ceremonies seem like a pleasant neighborhood parade with light snacks. The public face of the Panathenea involves athletic competitions, poetry contests, and a famous procession that delivers a new robe to Athena's statue, but the hidden ceremonies require initiation levels that make membership in exclusive clubs seem accessible by comparison. You've spent months qualifying for tonight's secret observances, proving your Athenian citizenship, demonstrating knowledge of ancient passwords, and showing the kind of civic devotion that makes running for public office seem like casual volunteer work. The irony that Athens' democracy requires elaborate exclusivity rituals apparently escapes most people, or they're just too polite to mention it. As evening approaches and the crowds thin, you slip away from the public festivities toward a restricted area of the Acropolis, where torchlight reveals entrances that don't appear on any tourist map. Your guide tonight is a priestess whose family has maintained these secret traditions for 15 generations, making her the human equivalent of a spiritual archaeological site. She explains that what you're about to witness represents Athens' most carefully guarded civic mysteries. Rituals that bind the city's elite together through shared knowledge that can never be discussed outside this sacred context. The underground chambers beneath the Parthenon feel like descending into Athens' psychological basement, where the city stores its deepest anxieties and most essential truths. The walls here predate the classical temples above, carved with symbols that blend pre-Greek religious traditions with Athenian political mythology in ways that would make cultural anthropologists reach for their notebooks and possibly question some fundamental assumptions about the development of democracy. You realize you're witnessing the survival of Bronze Age spirituality within classical civilization, like finding ancient software still running modern computers. The secret ceremonies begin with rituals that reenact the mythical contest between Athena and Poseidon for patronage of the city, but with details that never appear in public versions of the story. You watch as initiated participants perform roles that reveal how divine politics reflects human power struggles, while sacred objects are displayed that supposedly contain actual relics from that primordial competition. Historians still debate whether these artifacts are genuine Bronze Age survivals or carefully crafted forgeries designed to support Athenian civic mythology. But handling objects that might have witnessed the birth of your city creates psychological effects that transcend archaeological accuracy. The centerpiece of these hidden rites involves the renewal of Athens' sacred compact with Athena, performed through ceremonies that combine religious devotion with political oath-taking in ways that make the goddess both divine patron and constitutional principle. You participate in ritual declarations that bind you not just to religious observance, but to civic responsibilities that extend beyond normal citizenship requirements. It's like joining a spiritual citizens' council that operates parallel to ordinary democratic institutions, though with considerably higher security clearances and definitely stricter confidentiality agreements. The psychological atmosphere in these underground chambers creates a sense of participation in Athens' essential identity that transcends both individual personality and temporary political arrangements. You feel connected to the city's foundational principles through experiences that bypass rational analysis and speak directly to emotional loyalties that sustain civic cohesion across generations of political change. The secret Panathenea functions as democracy's mystery religion, providing transcendent meaning for participation in collective self-governance. As the night progresses, you witness ceremonies that reveal how Athenian democracy was understood by its practitioners as a form of religious practice requiring divine support and spiritual purification. The political and the sacred merge through rituals that make citizenship a mystical as well as legal status, while participation in democratic processes becomes a form of worship that honors both human reason and divine wisdom. You begin to understand why Athens produced both philosophical innovation and religious conservatism. The city's intellectual freedom was balanced by spiritual traditions that provided stability for social experimentation. The climax of the secret ceremonies involves collective affirmation of Athens' cosmic mission as the city chosen by Athena to demonstrate humanity's capacity for wisdom, justice, and artistic excellence. The rhetoric might sound grandiose to modern ears, but participating in rituals that connect your personal identity to transcendent civic purposes creates psychological effects that sustained Athenian confidence through centuries of political challenges and military defeats. As dawn breaks over the Acropolis, and you emerge from these hidden chambers into the morning light of another Athenian day, you carry with you transformed understanding of what it means to be a citizen of this remarkable city. The secret Panathenea has initiated you into mysteries that make ordinary political participation feel like sacred duty, while connecting your individual life to purposes that transcend personal concerns and temporal limitations. You pad barefoot across the polished marble floors of the Asclepian at Epidaurus, where the night air carries the scent of healing herbs and something that might be hope itself, mixed with the faint anxiety of people who've traveled hundreds of miles seeking medical advice from a deity who charges in dreams rather than drachmas. The temple complex sprawls before you like an ancient medical center designed by someone with unlimited budgets and a deep appreciation for the therapeutic value of really impressive architecture. Tonight, you're about to experience incubation, the mysterious healing ritual where sleep becomes medicine and dreams provide prescriptions that would make modern doctors reach for their malpractice insurance. The Asclepian operates on the revolutionary principle that divine physicians make house calls, but only if you're unconscious and preferably lying on sacred ground that's been properly blessed by priests who understand the importance of spiritual hygiene. You watch as fellow patients undergo purification rituals that would make modern hospital sterilization procedures seem casual. Ritual baths and sacred springs, dietary restrictions that eliminate everything enjoyable, and ethical cleansing that requires confessing every questionable decision you've made since childhood. Apparently, even divine medicine requires thorough patient history, though the questionnaire is considerably more invasive than your average medical intake form. Your preparation for the healing sleep begins at sunset with a careful examination by temple physicians who blend medical knowledge with religious authority in ways that would confuse modern licensing boards. These aren't faith healers operating with enthusiasm and limited training. They're highly educated professionals who've studied anatomy, pharmacology, and surgical techniques alongside prayer rituals and dream interpretation. The combination creates a medical practice that addresses both physical symptoms and spiritual causes, though the billing procedures remain refreshingly straightforward compared to contemporary healthcare administration. The sacred dormitory where incubation takes place feels like the world's first sleep clinic, designed with acoustic properties that amplify therapeutic rest while filtering out distracting external sounds. You notice how the stone benches are positioned to catch moonlight at specific angles, while the ventilation system creates air currents that carry the scent of healing herbs without creating uncomfortable drafts. The Greeks apparently understood principles of sleep medicine that modern research is still discovering, making their ancient healing centers remarkably sophisticated by contemporary standards. As you settle onto your designated sleeping platform, you observe the careful rituals that prepare both space and consciousness for divine medical consultation. Priests burn specific combinations of herbs that induce drowsiness, while supposedly attracting the attention of Asclepios, the healing god whose bedside manner apparently involves appearing in patients' dreams with treatment recommendations. The aromatic smoke creates a psychological bridge between waking anxiety about illness and the receptive state of consciousness required for supernatural medical intervention. The dream experiences that follow vary dramatically among patients, but all involve encounters with beings who provide medical guidance that ranges from practical dietary advice to complex surgical procedures that would challenge contemporary medical knowledge. You find yourself conversing with a figure whose authority seems absolute, but whose appearance keeps shifting between human physician and something more archetypal. Historians still debate whether these dream encounters represent genuine divine communication, sophisticated psychological therapy, or the effects of psychoactive substances in the temple incense. But the documented healing rates suggest the method produced measurable results regardless of theoretical explanations. The medical advice received through incubation dreams often includes prescriptions that blend conventional treatments with spiritual practices in ways that address both symptoms and underlying psychological causes of illness. Your dream physician recommends specific exercises, dietary changes, herbal remedies, and ritual practices that create comprehensive treatment plans addressing physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of healing. It's like receiving integrated medical care that treats the whole person rather than isolated symptoms, though the consultation fee is paid through religious devotion rather than insurance copayments. The morning after incubation brings gradual emergence from therapeutic sleep that feels more like awakening from successful surgery than ordinary rest. You experience subtle but definite changes in how your body feels and functions, while your consciousness carries clear memories of medical guidance that seemed impossible to forget despite their dreamlike origin. The temple physicians who monitor this transition understand the delicate process of integrating supernatural healing with conventional medical care, providing follow-up support that ensures divine prescriptions are properly implemented. The psychological impact of successful incubation extends beyond immediate healing to include transformed understanding of the relationship between mind, body, and spiritual well-being. You realize that illness often involves spiritual as well as physical dimensions, while healing requires addressing underlying patterns of thought and behavior that contribute to both disease and recovery. The Asclepian offers medical care that treats patients as whole human beings rather than collections of symptoms requiring separate specialists. As you prepare to leave this remarkable healing center, you carry with you not just improved health, but expanded understanding of medicine as sacred practice that honors both scientific knowledge and divine wisdom. The incubation experience has provided healing that transcends purely physical treatment, addressing aspects of wellness that conventional medicine often overlooks, while proving that sleep itself can serve as powerful therapeutic intervention when properly guided by skilled practitioners. You strip off your everyday chitin in the pre-dawn darkness outside Olympia, where the morning air carries the scent of olive oil and nervous sweat from athletes who've spent months preparing for competitions that blur the line between sport and sacred ritual. The torch flames dance against marble columns while you join other competitors in purification ceremonies that transform ordinary physical training into divine communion with gods who apparently take athletic performance quite seriously. Tonight, you're discovering that ancient sports required considerably more religious preparation than modern athletics, where the most spiritual element is usually hoping your performance-enhancing supplements don't show up on drug tests. The sacred athletic rites begin with elaborate purification rituals that would make contemporary pre-game routines seem casual and underblessed. You immerse yourself in the sacred Alpheus River while priests chant invocations to Zeus, Apollo, and Hermes, the Divine Athletic Committee, whose approval apparently makes the difference between victory and public humiliation. The cold water shocks your system into heightened awareness while washing away both physical impurities and psychological barriers that might interfere with peak performance. It's like ancient sports psychology with better scenery and considerably more nudity. Your guide through these athletic mysteries is a gymnasium master whose understanding of human potential transcends normal coaching expertise, combining knowledge of anatomy and training techniques with sophisticated understanding of how divine favor influences competitive outcomes. He explains that athletic excellence requires more than physical conditioning. It demands spiritual alignment with cosmic forces that govern both personal achievement and collective celebration. The Greeks understood that championship performance emerges from harmony between body, mind, and divine will, making religious preparation as essential as physical training. The ritual consecration of athletic equipment transforms ordinary sporting goods into sacred implements blessed by gods who appreciate the spiritual significance of really excellent javelin throws. You watch as priests anoint spears, discuses, and running sandals with oils that supposedly enhance both performance and divine protection during competition. The ceremony creates psychological connection between athlete and equipment that transcends normal tool use, making sports implements extensions of consecrated consciousness rather than mere mechanical aids. The pre-competition fasting and dietary restrictions required for athletic purification follow principles that blend nutritional wisdom with religious observance in ways that would challenge modern sports science assumptions. You consume only specific foods blessed by athletic priests. Honey, figs, goat cheese, and wine mixed with water in proportions that supposedly optimize both physical performance and spiritual receptivity. Historians still debate whether these dietary requirements were based on empirical observation or purely religious tradition, but the documented athletic achievements suggest the combination produced measurable benefits. The centerpiece of athletic religious preparation involves ritual dedication to specific deities whose patronage influences different competitive events. You participate in ceremonies honoring Hermes for running speed, Apollo for archery accuracy, and Ares for wrestling strength, creating divine partnerships that supposedly enhance natural ability through supernatural assistance. The psychological effects of believing yourself sponsored by Olympic gods would obviously boost confidence, though the Greeks apparently took these relationships considerably more literally than modern sports psychology would recommend. As competition day approaches, you experience the careful balance between physical readiness and spiritual preparation that characterized ancient athletic excellence. The training regimens include meditation practices designed to align personal will with divine purpose, breathing exercises that supposedly channel cosmic energy into physical performance, and visualization techniques that create mental rehearsal blessed by religious authority. It's remarkably similar to contemporary sports psychology, though with considerably more incense and definitely better architectural settings. The morning rituals performed immediately before competition involve final purification ceremonies that transform athletes from ordinary human beings into temporary vessels for divine athletic expression. You join other competitors in prayers that dedicate your performance to Zeus while requesting protection from injury and blessing for honorable victory. The psychological transformation from personal ambition to divine service creates mental conditions that transcend normal competitive anxiety, replacing ego-driven performance pressure with spiritual dedication that paradoxically enhances rather than diminishes athletic achievement. The sacred olive oil applied to your skin before competition serves both practical and religious functions, protecting against sun exposure while marking you as consecrated participant in rituals that honor human physical potential as divine gift. The aromatic oils create sensory connection to sacred space while providing psychological transition from ordinary consciousness to the heightened awareness required for peak athletic performance in front of crowds that include both mortal spectators and presumably divine observers. The post-competition Thanksgiving rituals ensure proper acknowledgement of divine assistance in athletic achievement, maintaining the spiritual relationships that support ongoing excellence in future competitions. Victory offerings include portions of prize money, wreaths woven from sacred plants, and formal prayers that honor both divine patrons and defeated opponents who provided worthy competition. The ceremonies create closure that transforms competitive achievement into spiritual growth, making athletic success a form of religious practice rather than mere personal accomplishment. As evening settles over Olympia and you reflect on the day's sacred competitions, you understand why the Greeks considered athletic excellence a form of worship that honors both human potential and divine inspiration. The combination of physical training with spiritual preparation creates performance that transcends normal human limitations, proving that competition can serve transcendent purposes when properly dedicated to cosmic rather than merely personal goals. You settle into the familiar rhythms of your family's morning rituals in a modest Athenian house, where the scent of baking bread mingles with burning incense from the small shrine that anchors your household's spiritual life like a compass pointing toward divine protection. The early light filters through latticed windows onto worn marble floors that have witnessed generations of births, deaths, and the quiet daily ceremonies that keep families connected to forces larger than domestic concerns. Here, in the intimate space where private life unfolds, you discover that the most profound mysteries aren't performed in grand temples, but whispered around kitchen hearths by people who understand that survival requires supernatural assistance with thoroughly mundane problems. The household shrine occupies the place of honor in your courtyard, a modest structure that houses images of protective deities whose attention spans the gap between cosmic authority and personal concerns. You watch your grandmother arrange fresh offerings with the same careful attention she brings to preparing meals: oil for the lamps, wine for libations, small cakes baked in shapes that honor both family traditions and divine preferences. Her movements carry the unconscious precision of rituals practiced for decades, creating sacred space through repetition that transforms ordinary domestic activities into continuous prayer. The morning purification rituals begin before dawn with water drawn from the neighborhood well and blessed through prayers that your great-grandmother taught your grandmother, who taught your mother, who now teaches you the ancient formulas for keeping households safe from malevolent influences. You splash the cool water on your face while reciting protections that cover everything from financial difficulties to romantic disappointments to the kind of minor catastrophes that can derail family harmony. It's like having spiritual insurance that covers both major disasters and everyday annoyances, though the premium is paid in daily attention rather than annual fees. The family altar serves as headquarters for domestic mystery traditions that operate parallel to public religion but address concerns that civic worship doesn't quite cover. Children's health, marital harmony, protection from nosy neighbors, and the delicate art of maintaining household prosperity without attracting divine jealousy or human resentment. You learn to tend the eternal flame that represents your family's continuous connection to ancestral wisdom and divine protection, understanding that letting it die would be like disconnecting your household's spiritual telephone line. The seasonal ceremonies that mark family transitions require initiation into mysteries that blend practical wisdom with supernatural protection in ways that prepare you for adult responsibilities while maintaining connection to childhood securities. You participate in coming-of-age rituals that involve secret passwords, protective amulets, and traditional knowledge about managing both human relationships and divine partnerships. Historians still debate whether these household mysteries represent degraded versions of temple religion or survival of pre-urban spiritual practices, but experiencing their psychological effects suggests they address needs that institutional worship often overlooks. The daily offerings made to household gods create ongoing dialogue between family concerns and divine assistance that operates through small but significant synchronicities, finding lost objects, avoiding dangerous situations, or receiving unexpected help when resources run low. You learn to recognize these subtle interventions as responses to consistent spiritual attention rather than random luck, developing faith in protective relationships that transcend rational explanation while providing practical benefits that enhance family security and emotional well-being. The kitchen becomes a secondary temple where food preparation involves blessing ingredients, timing meals according to religious calendars, and using recipes that carry both nutritional and spiritual benefits passed down through generations of women who understood cooking as form of domestic magic. You help prepare traditional dishes for family festivals, learning that proper seasoning includes both herbs and prayers, while sharing meals creates communion that strengthens family bonds and divine connections simultaneously. The bedtime rituals that conclude each day involve protection ceremonies that create sacred boundaries around sleeping family members, ensuring safe passage through dream states while maintaining connection to ancestors whose guidance continues operating through unconscious channels. You learn prayers that address specific nighttime fears, bad dreams, illness, thieves, fires, and other dangers that threaten household security when consciousness becomes vulnerable through sleep. The crisis management protocols activated during family emergencies reveal how household mysteries provide practical support systems that combine human networks with supernatural resources in ways that create comprehensive assistance during difficult periods. You observe how illness, financial problems, or social conflicts trigger intensified ritual activity that mobilizes both divine intervention and community support, proving that spiritual practices strengthen rather than replace practical problem-solving capabilities. The psychological atmosphere created by consistent household ritual practice generates a sense of security that enables family members to venture confidently into uncertain external situations while maintaining connection to stable spiritual foundations that provide ongoing guidance and protection. You experience how domestic mysteries create sacred space within ordinary living conditions, transforming routine activities into continuous spiritual practice that sanctifies family life without requiring dramatic religious experiences. As evening settles over your household, and the day's work transitions into restful preparation for tomorrow's challenges, you understand how these intimate traditions provide spiritual foundation for all other religious and social activities. The household mysteries offer something that public worship can't provide: personalized divine attention that addresses specific family needs while maintaining connection to larger cosmic purposes through practices that honor both individual concerns and collective wisdom. You find yourself drifting through the gentle twilight of a sacred olive grove with a last golden rays of ancient sunlight filter through leaves that have whispered secrets for 1,000 years. The air moves softly around you, carrying the faint scent of lavender and warm stone, while somewhere in the peaceful distance, you can hear the quiet murmur of a spring that has been offering its gentle song since before Homer first sang of heroes and gods. Tonight, as our journey through the hidden mysteries of ancient Greece draws to its close, you settle into the embracing quiet of this timeless place where countless seekers before you have found rest after their own spiritual adventures. The marble bench beneath you holds the warmth of the day's sun, while overhead, the first stars begin their nightly appearance like old friends returning to check on your dreams. The olive trees around you seem to lean in with grandfatherly affection, their ancient branches creating a natural cathedral where silence itself becomes a form of prayer. You feel the gentle weight of all the mysteries you've witnessed: the sacred caves of Eleusis, the wine-blessed groves of Dionysius, the mountain peaks where gods and mortals met in moments of transcendent understanding. Each memory settles into your consciousness like smooth stones finding their perfect resting places in a peaceful stream. The evening air grows cooler now, wrapping around you like the softest silk chitin, while the distant sound of temple bells creates a rhythm as gentle as a sleeping heart. You realize that all these ancient secrets, all these carefully guarded rituals and mysterious ceremonies were really about something beautifully simple: the eternal human need to feel connected to something larger and more loving than our everyday concerns. The Greeks understood what you're discovering now. In this moment of perfect quiet, that the most profound mysteries aren't hidden in elaborate ceremonies or complex philosophical teachings, but in the gentle recognition that you belong to a universe that has been taking care of you all along. The sacred and the ordinary were never really separate. They were always dancing together like lovers who never needed to announce their devotion. As the stars grow brighter and the night sounds of ancient Greece, the soft hoot of owls, the distant bleating of goats, the whisper of wind through cypress trees, begin their eternal lullaby, you feel yourself sinking deeper into a peace that needs no passwords, no secret knowledge, no elaborate initiation. This tranquility has been waiting for you all along, patient as the marble columns, constant as the Mediterranean tides. The mysteries you've explored tonight weren't really about the past. They were about this eternal present moment where wisdom and wonder, ancient and modern, sacred and simple, all dissolve into the gentle understanding that you are exactly where you belong. The olive grove holds you in its timeless embrace while your breathing naturally slows to match the ancient rhythms of earth and sky. Let the weight of these old secrets settle into sleep now, transforming into dreams that carry you through peaceful depths where mystery and rest become one gentle, endless blessing. The gods of ancient Greece, if they're listening at all, are probably smiling at how simple their greatest secret always was. That peace itself is the most sacred mystery, requiring nothing more than your willingness to receive it. The warm stone beneath you, the soft air around you, the star-filled darkness above you, all of it conspires now to cradle you into the deepest, most restorative sleep, where ancient wisdom becomes tomorrow's quiet strength, and where every breath draws you deeper into the blessed mystery of simply being perfectly, peacefully, eternally at rest. Sweet dreams, gentle traveler. The mysteries will keep their vigil while you sleep.